In the previous video, we looked at how you can build your grid using Beaver Builder. And we went through thoroughly and talked about these three icons here for the rows. So the move icon, the duplicate icon, and the remove icon. But we skimmed over this wrench icon here, which is row settings. This video is going to be dedicated to helping you understand the settings behind this icon. Now, instead of going through and recreating multiple rows to show you all the different types of effects, which would really push out the length of this video, what I'm going to do now is we're going to go up to the templates button and we're going to load one of the pre-existing templates that comes with the Beaver Builder plugin. And I'm going to load this one here because it does have some really cool row effects and it will give us a great basis to go in and discuss the different types of settings and how they can be used to create really modern websites with really cool effects. So let's go ahead and we're going to activate this Motor City template. Now I also want to show you another thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to append the new layout, which means we're going to keep this row here that we're just using with the 2 columns in it. And we're going to append the new layout. So that template that we just clicked on is going to load after this row up here that we already have in the page. So let's click Append New Layout. And the first thing that I want to show you guys here is this row up here has 2 columns, but there's no content in these rows. So I want to show you guys what happens when you publish a page that has a row with no content in the columns. So let's click Done and then publish the changes. And you'll see that row is not shown. So always remember, if you drag a row into your page and you don't put any content in it, even if it has a column or 2 columns or 3 columns, if there's no content in the row or in the columns, it does not get shown. But it is worth noting that if we do look at the source code by inspecting element, that row is still on the page, so the code is still being displayed, but because there's no content, it has no height and thus it is not showing. So that's a tip. Don't ever leave rows on your page with no content in them because the code still has to be loaded on the page, but because there's no content there, it will have no height and it will not be shown. So you're loading this HTML for no reason, and we always want to make our pages as compact as possible so they load quicker. So just always be mindful of not leaving empty rows on your pages. Okay, so let's go back into the page builder by clicking this page builder icon. And then let's hover on our row and click on this remove icon to remove that row. Okay, so let's just close this sidebar and we'll just scroll down the page. So as I scroll, take notice specifically of the rows. So the rows are the horizontal strips. So this is one row here. Here's another row. They'll light up as I scroll down. There's another row. Take notice of how the background image moves as we scroll down the page. And then also take notice of the effects on the background. So there's going to be a slideshow a little bit down the page where the image is fading in and out or it's moving closer. So I'm going to show you guys how they're created so that you guys can go and recreate them. So let's scroll down the page. So this first row has parallax. So see how that background image moves at a slower rate to the text above it? That's parallax. That's one of the effects that we can achieve. Now also notice that this row here is the exact size of the browser. So my browser window, I'm on a laptop. So as I scroll, notice how the top of the row aligns to the top of my browser. And the bottom of the row aligns to the bottom of my browser. So it's dynamically calculating the height of my screen and then making this row here fill the complete screen. The next row has a background color, and so does the next one. But this row here has a slideshow. So see how the image is fading in and out? That's a slideshow. So you can have a gallery of images as the background for a row, and they're going to fade in and out to give a slideshow effect. And if we keep going, that's a row, that's another row, and these are just rows with background colors. So you can see there's quite a cool array of effects that we can do, like the slideshows and the full height rows with the parallax background. And these are all straight out of the box effects that you can achieve using the Beaver Builder plugin when hovering on a row and editing the row settings. So let's take a look at those row settings by clicking on this wrench icon to launch the modal that contains all our row settings. So the first thing that I want to point out is that there's actually two tabs here. So there's the Style tab, and that's where you style the row. So things like the background color, the background image, a border on the row, all those things like text colors within the rows, they're styling and they're styled under this Style tab. Now if we click on the Advanced tab, this is where we set the margin on the row, the padding on the row, and we also have some responsive options down here. And you can also add IDs for this row here and add a CSS class here. Now I'm going to dedicate a whole lesson to going over the responsive options for rows, columns, and modules. And that's going to be in a separate set of modules called Responsive Options in Beaver Builder, because there are quite a few options with them. So let's jump back to the Style tab. And let's just see what this row is currently doing. So the width is set to full width, meaning that it goes edge to edge. So all the way from the left over to the right. So the alternative to that is fixed. So let's click on that and you can see it pulls it in. So let's go back and set it to full width. Now, as we saw in a previous lesson, the width and the content width, these two settings here, when you drag in a row, so row and you drag into columns, if we click to edit that new row that we just added, width is full width and then content width is fixed. They come from Tools Global Settings. So the global settings for Beaver Builder, if we scroll down, rows, default row width, full width, default row content width, fixed width. So because these are set to full width and fixed, that's why when we add new rows into our page, they get that full width and fixed content width. Now if we go back into this row, width is full width and content is full width. So this template actually overwrites that global setting that we have and it's set to full width. Now, width over here refers to, if you hover on here, the full width of the row. So edge to edge. So it's the outer shell of this row. The content width is when you're adding your modules and your rows, how far can that content stretch? So do you want the content full width, where the content can go all the way to the left and all the way to the right? Or do you want to confine it to the grid using fixed width? So I'm just going to give you an example. And we're going to go into Add Content, Basic Modules, and then let's add a text editor module down here. And what I'm going to do is paste some dummy text into this box and then center it. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger just for this tutorial, and I'm going to save. So you can see, because in the row settings for this row, the content width is set to full width. We added content, so add content, we added a text editor module, and it's going from edge to edge. Now just a tip, on larger screens like 27-inch screens, like 27-inch iMacs and things like that, this text going edge to edge probably isn't going to look very good, because as this gets wider, you're going to have too many words on the one line, and that makes it very difficult to read. So that's just a tip. So if you are putting text into a row, it's usually best to always just come into here, make content width fixed width, because that pulls the text in. So it's fixed within the content width. So see how it lines up with our header? And it just keeps the amount of words per line nice and easy to read. So that's those two options there. And the things that you just need to be mindful of, just like I've said, is that these two options are set in Tools Global Settings. So when you drag a row, the options that you set in your global settings are set here, but you can come in here and overwrite them. The next option, which is height, if you hover on that, it says full height rows fill the height of the browser window. So this is currently set to full height. And like I mentioned before, as we scroll down, see how the row fills the complete browser? So the top of this row meets the top of my browser up here, and the bottom of this row meets the bottom of my browser down there. Really cool effect, really modern effect. But if we go back into the row settings for this row, and I'll just show you the alternative, if we set the height to default, which is what it will usually be when you start building your pages, a row will usually be default height, you can see that the height of the row depends on the content within that row. So if we added more text into this row, so I'm just going to duplicate this just to speed things up. Notice how the row gets taller because it's expanding to fill whatever content's in there. But if we go back into our row settings and we make the height full height, you can see as we scroll down, you can see that once again that row is filling the browser height. And if we remove content, the height of the row does not change. Out of the box, it will always be set to default, and then you can set on a per row basis, so you have to go in and edit each row to come into the row settings here and then set it to full height for the rows that you want that effect on. Now this content alignment setting is related to this height setting. So if we set this back to default, notice how it hides. That's because it's only applicable when you select full height for the rows. So if the height of the row is full height, so it's going to go and fill our whole browser, we can align the content center, which is where it currently is. So this is vertically aligned center. And usually the most common setting will be the center, but you could come in here and do it to the top. And now that content is at the top. And as we scroll down, it takes the full height of the browser, except this is now vertically aligned to the top and not the center. And just a tip, I love giving tips where I can. And the tip for this using the full height rows is that the success of a full height row and its effect really does depend on the background image. So if you have a strong background image, it's going to look great when it takes up the full height. But if you don't have a really good background image and it's, maybe a bit boring, a bit bland, as people scroll, especially on larger screens like 27-inch iMacs for instance, they're just going to see a whole screen dedicated to the background image that is maybe not so powerful, and it's going to lose that effect. Okay, so let's go back into this rows settings. So that's these settings here. Again, if you ever forget what they do, you can obviously watch this video again and go through the lesson, or you can just hover on the tooltip here and get a reminder of what it does. Okay, let's go down to the next couple of options, and this is colors. So you can see there's some options here with color pickers, and these are colors for texts, links, link hover, and heading colors. So let's go through these, but first what I'm going to do is I'm going to exit out of this, and I'm going to add a heading module to the page. And then I'm just going to center it, make it a H2. So I'll click save. So you can see it is there, but you can't see it. And that's exactly what I want so that I can show you guys the next step. And what we're also going to do is in this text here, let's just say this is a hyperlink. So let's click on the link icon, and I'm just going to put in a dummy URL here, just to my website, and then let's click save. So let's go back into our row settings, and I'm going to drag this over so we can see what we're doing, and we'll scroll down, and I just want to go through a few things. So this heading color is obviously a blue that we can't see, and this text is a gray, and the hyperlink is red. So these colors are obviously coming from somewhere, and currently they're coming from our theme. So I am set up using the Beaver Builder theme. So in my theme settings for the Beaver Builder theme, I've set my headings to be this blue color, text to be gray, and hyperlinks to be red. So I set that on a theme level, but you can actually overwrite your theme settings and apply it to just a row by editing just that row's settings. So these changes that we do make here are only going to affect this row here. They're row specific. So the first setting we're going to change is this text color. So this will change all text in this row, including headings and paragraphs. So let's go ahead and we'll make that a white. And you can see this heading module that we just dragged in before, that's changed to a white, and also the paragraph text underneath has changed to a white. And notice that it's also changed the hyperlink that we had there. So it changes any links, text, and headings. Pretty much any text that's in there, no matter what it is, it will change the color of it. But I feel like I should mention that it does depend on the theme you're using. If your theme's CSS is more specific than these row settings, then it might not apply. But for the majority of themes, changing this setting here will affect all the text within this row. Next, the link color. So again, that was a hyperlink. Let's click on the color picker and let's make that this yellow color. So that changes the hyperlinks in this row. Now, because that's a link, it has a hover state. So when we put our mouse over that, link hover color, we can actually change that to another color. And let's change it to the same gold color, but maybe a little bit greener. So if we were to hover on that, it will change from this gold to this green. And I'm going to show you guys that in a second. And the heading color will change this heading module over here. So right now it's getting this text color, but we can change the headings and we could make that a purple. And there it is. And just to show you guys that hover state, if we do save this and click done and publish, when I hover on this text, it's going to go that green color. Okay, let's go back into Beaver Builder. So we'll click Page Builder at the top. And then let's edit this row settings again. So hover on it and click the wrench. So we've done these settings here. And we've gone through the color settings. And now we're going to go through the background for the row. So the background setting consists of a drop down. And changing this drop down value here will show different settings underneath. So currently the background type is set to Parallax. And that's why the background parallax section is showing below. But if we change that to none, it will hide. And it also applies live on the front end. So you can see there's nothing there now. There's no background image. Now if we click color, the section background color with some background color settings below appears. And we can go ahead and using the color picker, we could change this to maybe a gold color. And we can also set an opacity. So we could make that 50%. Now let's drag this over so you can see the changes. The next option is photo. So if we click on photo, background photo, that section of options appears and we can select a photo. So we could select that car again and then click select photo. And if we go down, there's a couple more options here for the background photo. So repeat, you have all your repeat options here. So we could tile it, which would take this image and then just tile it, you know, like your bathroom, just one after another in a grid. We could make it just repeat horizontally. So it would just go from left to right and keep repeating. Or we could tile it vertically. So one up here, then this one, then one below, and it will just go down the screen. Generally, as a rule of thumb, you would use tile if you're going to be using a background pattern. If not, you're mainly just going to be using none because you do not want that background image to repeat. But again, it really depends on the design that you're going for and the effect that you're trying to achieve. Now, position. So that's quite self-explanatory. The next setting is attachment. So if you hover on this, if you don't know what a background attachment is, it's how it works when you're scrolling. So currently this is set to scroll. So as we scroll down the page, see how it comes with our screen? So we get that sense that we are in fact scrolling the page. But if we change that to fixed, notice how when we scroll, it does not move with the page. And then scale, if we hover on this tooltip, it says scale applies to how the image should display in the background. And black and white, this is probably the value that you're going to want to use most of the time. So what this scale setting does when it's set to fill is it gets that background image and stretches it until it takes up and covers the whole row. So it might crop the image a little bit, but you'll be able to see the background image taking up the full row, which is, again, more than likely the effect that you're trying to achieve. The other options here are none. So what the none setting would do is if you upload this image at, say, 800 pixels by 500 pixels, the image would display in the background as 800 by 500 pixels, so it won't stretch it. And the next option is fit, and that will stretch the background image as much as it needs to, but it will not crop the image. So see, we can see the whole image here, but if it was to extend all the way to the left and then all the way to the right, it would probably crop some of the top and bottom, and fit doesn't do that. So again, you're most likely going to do fill, so let's just leave it like that. Okay, let's go on to the next settings. So a background color is the base of the row, and then when you put on a background photo, the background photo sits on top of that color. So what this means is this gold color is actually applied to this row as well, but this background image up here is sitting on top of that gold color, and the scale is set to fill, and that's why we can't see it. Because fill makes this image here cover the whole entire row, and thus we can't see the background color that is underneath it. And that's why if we do set it to fit, we can see that gold color, and we can also change this, and you'll notice that changes to the green. Now, something that might not be as relevant these days, but back in the days when internet connections were a little bit slower, people would set their browsers to not download background images. And what that meant is the background images wouldn't load and the background colors would be shown. Now, depending on your target audience these days, there might be rare cases that this still applies. An example being maybe you're doing a website where hospitals have to access it, and maybe the hospitals don't allow images to be downloaded, or you might be targeting people in countries where their internet is not fast. Again, it is a bit on the rarer side these days, but it is generally always good, as a rule of thumb, that when you do set a background photo, always set a background color. So it's a great habit to get into the swing of things of. Also, when the page is loading, it has to download this background image, but the background color shows straight away. So when this page is loading, your background color will show, and then the background image will load over the top. So there could be a split second where you do see the background color here. And while that's loading, we obviously want to make sure we can see this text. So a good way to do this is just say this is a black image here and the text is white. You'd set this background color to black so that when this page does start loading, the black background color would be shown for the row and the white text would still be visible, and then our background photo would load over the top. So that's the order of events that a page will load, and you can see that. And again, it's just a great habit to get into. Always set a background color if you're setting a background photo. Now, the background overlay option is one of my favorite options because you can create some cool effects here. So say we have this car picture in the background as our row background image, but the text is a little bit harder to read, this gold text and this white text. What you can do is in the overlay color, we could set this to something like a black, and you can see how it puts a black overlay between the background image and our text and modules over the top and makes it a bit easier to read. So I'm just going to exaggerate this here and make it 90%. So you can see our text is a lot easier to read. The background image doesn't show, obviously, because we're putting an overlay over the top. But you can just keep going and setting this until you're happy with the outcome. So say that might be nice. Now, a quick pro tip here, this background image on the row of the car is still loading the full color image, but then this overlay is just getting placed over the top. So because that car is loading in its full color, but then we're dimming it with this overlay, it sometimes isn't the best way to go about doing things. Now, if you have an image editing program, it's always better to take the full color image, so in this example, the car, and then in say Photoshop or another image editor, put this overlay over the top and then export that image of the car with this black overlay and then add it as a background image. So then you wouldn't use this overlay color. And I'm just going to show you exactly what I mean. So let's go into Photoshop. And then here's our car. So if we have a look at this now and we try and save as, we can see that this image is going to be 82 kilobytes. Now, if we add a new layer on top of this and make it black and 80%, so we're mimicking those exact settings that we're just using in Beaver Builder for the overlay. And then let's try and save that now. And you can see it's only 49 kilobytes. And that's because it has less colors. It's more of an all black image. So if we upload this image now with the black overlay that we've created in our image editing program, that file size of our background image is going to be smaller, and so our page is going to load faster. So that's why I always recommend that if you do have an image editing program, always put the overlay features as part of the image in your image editor, and then save that as an image, and then add it to your background upload file for that row settings, and don't use this background overlay feature. Now, if you don't have access to an image editing program, this is a great way to go ahead and recreate this effect without having to go in and edit an image. But if you are concerned with website optimization and making sure your website loads as fast as possible, always edit the image in a photo editing program and add the overlay as part of the image, because as a result of adding that overlay, the image will have less colors, be thus smaller in file size, and then load faster on your page. And next is border. So currently there's no borders on our row. If we set this to solid and go down, and let's just choose a color that's going to stand out here. So maybe that gold again. So you can see it defaults to the top and bottom, 1 pixel and 1 pixels both, and the left and right borders have 0 pixels. So we can see this gold up the top here, gold down the bottom, and there's none on the left or right. Now, this gray border here is actually because the background image is not set to fill. So let's just click fill and that will go out. So let's say we add 15 pixels up the top and 15 pixels down the bottom. And then we could go and add 15 pixels on the left and 15 pixels on the right. So now that whole row has a border around it. So that's how that works. So that's it for the background photo settings. Let's go up the top. And leaving our border settings applied, let's change our background type to video. So because we selected background type video, we've got this new section, background video, and there's some options here. So we have the source, so we could select one from our media library. And when we select one from our media library, we can nominate an MP4, a WebM, and a fallback photo. So if the video fails to load, it would use this picture. And you can again see this in the tooltip. A photo will be displayed if the video fails to load. Now, I won't get into the specifics of videos on your website because there are courses dedicated to going through them. But basically, MP4 and WebM, there's different video formats that work better in different browsers. So you can upload different formats of the same video, and then your browser will select the one that it prefers so that it gives the best experience when loading that video in that particular browser. So that's all these multiple options are doing there. It's not that you would add a different video to these, you'd add the same video just in a different format. Now, as a rule of thumb, you probably don't want to stream from your website. So when you select Media Library and you select a video, you go into your file manager and you can select videos that you've uploaded to your WordPress website. Now, when somebody loads this page, they have to load that video from your media library, and that chews into the bandwidth of your hosting. Videos take up storage on your web server. It's not ideal. So generally, I would recommend don't choose Media Library here and host the video in your WordPress install, but rather choose a third party. So you can do a URL, or you can do a YouTube or Vimeo. Now I would definitely recommend a YouTube or a Vimeo, or your preferable third-party service using a URL. So under YouTube, you just add the URL. So let's just go to YouTube now and find a sample video. So I've just typed in background video website, found this one, so we just go up here and we copy the URL, go back to our website, paste the URL to the YouTube video, enable audio, yes or no. I highly recommend not enabling audio because it's quite distracting. So let's just leave that as no. And for back photo, what I would do is I would take a screenshot of a frame within that video and then upload it here. And again, this is just for when the video doesn't load. And you can see in the background, there's our video. And if we go down, the background color settings remain from the background photo settings. So let's leave that as black. And the background overlay remains just the same as the background photo setting. Let's get rid of this opacity and maybe make it 20 for the background overlay, or maybe even 0, just so we can see through and see that full video. And again, the border settings remain the same. So I'm just going to save this just to show you guys how that background video is working. So really cool effect. And again, because it's hosted on YouTube, we're not eating up our bandwidth because we're getting the data from YouTube servers. And also we're not using up our storage on our web server because the video is uploaded onto YouTube servers and taking up their data. And there's one last thing I just want to point out with these video backgrounds is don't just use a URL from someone else, because if they do remove their video from their account, the video on your website is not going to load as a row background. So it's always advised that you just upload a video that you want to use for your own video background so that you're in control of where it's uploaded and it's not going to be removed without you knowing. Okay, let's go back into the row settings and go down to the next option, so the background type, and let's do slideshow. So a slideshow is a series of images that are going to fade in and out. So you can choose a source from SmugMug, which is a third-party thing, sort of like Flickr where you upload your images, or you could also choose your media library. For this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys the media library because that's how most people do use this setting. And if you're using SmugMug, it's quite self-explanatory. If we just click on that quickly, you just put in your feed URL and then you know the speed that you want your images to fade in and out, or can burn slide, these settings that we're about to go through. So the same settings here, but you're just getting it from a different source. So let's go back to the media library and let's click Create Gallery. And for this tutorial, let's just select these 3 images here. And then once you've selected the images from your media gallery, you click Add to Gallery. And you can drag and order them just like you normally do in WordPress. And then we could click Update Gallery. And you can see our image is fading at the back, in and out. So every 3 seconds, it's fading, and the fade takes 1 second. So you wouldn't do this, but if we set this to 1, you can see every 1 second it fades in and out between those 3 photos. Let's set this back to 3. So that's the speed. That's how long an image stays shown. Transition is the effect as it's going on to the next image that you've uploaded into this gallery. And transition speed is how long it takes to go from one image to another. The last option here is Randomized Photos. So if we go back to Edit Gallery, you can see that there's a picture of myself and then a lady and then the car. So they're in that order. So if Randomized Photos is set to no, they will go in that order. But if we select yes, then every time the page loads, it will be in a random order that those images are loaded and faded in and out. So let's just change this setting back to no. And I want to show you some of these transition effects. So currently the transition effect is set to fade, and you can see that as the images are fading in and out in the background. We could also do a Ken Burns, which is highly popular. And that's where you have an image that sort of zooms in slowly over time or away over time as it fades in and out. It's like the normal slideshow setting with the fade, but it just moves the image around a bit more and adds that dynamic feel to it. Next one is slide horizontal. So as you can see, that's sliding the image from right to left. You can also do slide vertical. So the image is sliding up. Blinds. Bars. Now there's some things that I want you to keep in mind when you are using this slideshow here. Number one is that every image in the slideshow has to be loaded. So just say you had 3 images here, all 3 images have to be loaded onto the page as it loads, and that can slow down the loading of your website and in such affect your search engine optimization. Because again, Google and other search engines like fast loading websites. So always be mindful of how many images you are adding to the slideshow, and 2 or 3 is probably the maximum that you're gonna use. And also keep in mind that if this is going for 3 seconds showing a photo and then it takes a second to change to the next, that's 4 seconds for each photo. So to see all 3 photos, that means somebody has to stay here on the screen for 12 seconds. That's probably unlikely that they're gonna do that. So I generally actually do not use this slideshow setting just because it does make the page load slower, and also people aren't generally going to stop and look at all the photos. Now there are niches that this could apply to, so for instance maybe a wedding site or a photography site, an artist site, somewhere where the images are quite heavy in communicating a message and people are expecting to look at imagery, then you could probably get away with adding some more images here. But as a rule of thumb, I probably would suggest really considering when you should use this slideshow as a row background, and also bear in mind that people aren't really going to stop scrolling your page to look at all of them. And again, if we scroll down, the slideshow settings have the same background color and background overlay settings. So we could set this to 80, and you can see our slideshow is going to happen behind this black overlay that's 80% opacity. So I'll just remove that and set it back to 0. Let's go up to the next setting. So background type. So from slideshow, the last one, parallax. So let's select a photo, and let's select that car photo again and click select photo. And again, this is the one that came on this row when we first loaded the template. So if we save this, as we scroll, the background image of the car and the text move at different rates. So see how the background image is moving slower than the text over the top? And it creates that cool modern effect that you're seeing these days on websites. Now if we go back into the row settings, the options that you have for parallax, you select the image and you can select the speed. So currently that's fast. So what that means is as we're scrolling, that image is actually moving not at the same rate as the text over the top, but it's moving what is classified as fast in this setting. If we change this to slow and click save, and now we scroll, see how that background image barely moves? It's still moving, but it's moving a lot slower than the fast setting. What I do recommend for this setting is just trialing it out. I mean, it's only a change in a drop-down value, but generally for this parallax effect for the background, you're usually going to use fast or maybe a medium. Generally not slow because you can't notice it too much. But if in doubt, try fast and then you can slow it down using medium. And again, parallax has the same background color and overlay effects and the border. Now, if we go back up to the top, row settings also comes with the advanced tab. So let's just go through these. So the margins on a row push the row away from the other elements on the page. So if we enter 100 pixels margin for this row on the top, that is 100 pixels of space. So this is the header. Because this is the first row on the page, there's 100 pixels margin on top of this row. And again, on the bottom, if we scroll down, here's one row and here's another. We can space it out using 100 pixels and push this row away from the row below it. You can also do this for the left and right. So there's the left and there's the right. And as you can see, now our row is pushing away from everything around it 100 pixels of margin. Now, generally, I don't set margins on rows, and there's a reason, and that's because I use padding. So see here how the background image is not extending from edge to edge anymore, and the rows aren't touching? It's generally not what you'd want to achieve. You're usually going to use padding. So let's just reset this back to 0. So now our rows are touching. And then let's go ahead and set some padding. So I'm just going to move this over to the side. And before we set the padding, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the Style tab, and the height is full height, which means, again, the row is going to extend the full height of our browser. And the reason we're going to change this full height to default is so that we can see these padding effects take place. So with the padding, let's just say we add 80 pixels to the bottom. That text editor module is now pushed from the edge of that row 80 pixels. And you can see the background image still extends to the edge of the row, and there's no gap between our rows like when we did add the margin to our row. And it's for that reason that we generally want to use padding on our rows. So let's just go ahead and remove that margin. And if you are not sure what the difference between margins and padding is, there's a lot of resources online. I definitely suggest going and having a read. But that's the basics. Margins push elements away from the one that we're currently adding the margin to, and padding adds spacing within that same element so that the content within that element is pushed away from the edges. So let's go down, and there's responsive layout options here. I'm dedicating a whole section of lessons to go through the responsive options in Beaver Builder, so we will cover this in a later lesson because it is quite comprehensive, and I do want to go in and give you a complete overview of how it all works. So let's move on to the next option, which is visibility. So by default, your row visibility settings for the display option will be set to always. That means no matter whether somebody's logged in or logged out, they will see that row. But you can also come in here and select it to logged out user. So what that means is if somebody's logged in, they will not see this row. So for instance, a good application of this might be you have a pricing table in this row, but if somebody's logged in, that means they're a paying member. So maybe they don't need to see that pricing table again, so you could just not show that when they're logged in. You could also show it for just logged in users. So for example, one application that I can think of now might be, you might have a video here that you only want to show to people who have registered for your website and logged in, sort of like a members only video. So if the person's logged in, they will be able to see this row with that video in it. And if they're not logged in, so they haven't registered for your site, that means they can't see that video. So it's encouraging people to log in so you gather their details. And you can also select a WordPress capability that the logged in user must have to be able to see this row. And if you're not sure what capabilities are, you can click and this will open up the WordPress codex and you can sort of go through and see what they do. But they are a core WordPress functionality and there's lots of documentation online, so I won't actually go into how you can use these capabilities for row settings. And lastly, for the row settings in the Advanced tab is this ID and class. So you can add an ID that this row gets. So the HTML would say, this row ID equals home, and then you could target that using CSS. Or you can also add a class here, and then this row would have row class equals, and then whatever you put into this box. So for this, you can add multiple classes using spaces. So you could write class 1, class 2, class 3, etc. And then you would use these in your CSS to target them and just style this row. I show you how to do some things later on in another lesson within this course where I go in depth and we add a class and then we start styling a few things on the page. So that covers comprehensively every option and setting that you have available in your row settings panel. So now that we've mastered rows, let's go on to columns. I'll see you in the next lesson.